Hey guys, Solomon here. Today I would like to talk to you about Docker. This is one of the hottest things that's going on in the industry these days. And part of what I'm going to do in here is just give you a quick overview. This isn't going to be an extensive session on Docker. There's so much available on the internet about it. But this just to give you an idea of what Docker is all about. And then I'm going to run a quick demo just to illustrate some of the scenarios that Docker could be run within WebSphere and just to show that WebSphere application server does support Docker. In fact, we have the Liberty profile on Docker Hub already. So I guess why do you care about Docker? And the challenge is obviously anything that gets invented to resolve an issue. And if you look into the challenge that people get is that they have too many things to run and they have too many choices to run these things on. And this kind of comes down to and what's called the metrics from hell. And you have the back background workers. You got the web front end and static website, and you want to run them on a development VM versus a QS server versus um, public cloud, and so on and so forth. And that gives you too many combinations to try to understand whether it is supported or not. And this kind of reminds us of how things used to be prior to the 60s in terms of shipping products. Um, um, and as you can see, I mean, you're able to set a barrel if you want to ship a coffee bag or a coffee um, a piano, for example, or anything else, or a car or a computer. And this was kind of difficult because you needed to adjust and create a special container, if you will, or a special equipment to be able to handle that particular shipment. Are you going to use the same forklift, for example? Are you going to use the same train cart or train cart, yes, to basically be able to move it from point A to point B, not to mention ships. And as a result of that, kind of where the Docker container concept came in is, as you can see in here, is the shipping industry just basically created this concept of a container. You can take that container, fill it up with whatever you want, and it's irrelevant to the people who actually operate that container. From moving it from point A to point B, they know exactly what they need to do. They know the measurements, the dimensions of that container. They know how to fit it on a ship or on a train or on a forklift, and hence basically made things so much simpler. And that's exactly kind of the concept came in with Docker. Docker is an open source project that is makes it easy for you to create portable, self-sufficient, and lightweight containers for any applications. So in a way, when you look at it in the same matrix that we were talking about, any combination you're talking about container, what's in it is irrelevant, and you can switch back and forth between them. If you look, for example, at the content of the container, just like when we say this, the people who deal with the objects who want to ship them have to understand the inside of the container. The people who operate the movements of these containers from a cargo perspective, they don't really care about the content. The same thing applies in here. As you can see in this chart, you'll see that from a content perspective, that's what the developers will care about. That developer will care about his or her code, will care about the libraries that their code want, um, um, the package manager, the application, and so on and so forth, versus the operations guy who's gonna care about the outside of it. For example, the login, the remote access, the monitoring, the network configurations, which is basically anything that you need to start and stop that container. So quickly, if I want to kind of go over the Docker terminology, because you're going to hear these, I guess, a lot when you're dealing with Docker. You got the image, and as stated in here, it's layered file system where each layer references the layer below it. That's the beauty of it, is that you can continue to add more and more layers, and if any of these layers change, that's the only thing that you need to change, and you could just build another layer on top of existing ones, and that will simplify your ability to do more things and very quickly. The Docker file is the build script that allow you to use an existing image as a starting point and then modify that image. You can augment the image to add other things to it. And that image basically is that's what you're going to use, or actually you're going to, when you, the Docker file is what you're going to use to create this new image when you try to run it. A container is an instance. It's a runtime instance of the image that you create, plus of course a read-write layer. That image could be something that you create yourself based on, like I said, on an existing image, or just simply take an image from the Docker Hub. And the Docker Hub is a centralized repository of Docker images. So if I take you right now, for example, to docker.com and I go to the registry, you will see that in the Docker repository, I can go in here and just search for the word liberty. And if I do that, you will see that here there is the WebSphere Liberty image that exists on Docker Hub that you can basically pull and use. If you click on it, you will see here's the Docker pull Liberty, or WebSphere Liberty is what you need to do. And in my case, this is obviously what I'm going to be running the demo on. The second piece that I would like to bring to your attention is that if you do go to docker.com and go to browse, for example, or I'm sorry, to go to install um, and docs, this will give you a list of all the things that you need to do if you're trying to run Docker on a specific platform. As you can see, it supports everything. The demo that I'm doing for you today, I am using a Windows machine, and there's no, you can't use Docker as of, I guess, February 20th, 2015. You are not able to use Docker on Windows. I think Microsoft is working on it, my understanding. But of course, you can use just virtualized environment to allow you to do that. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. For the instructions on how to set all that up, you could just simply see it in here by clicking on Microsoft Windows, and it will walk you through the steps. We will be using this boot to Docker to install a virtual machine and be able to run the Docker container. So let's get started. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to create a couple of, I could start a couple of command lines in here. And I will, in this command line that you see in here, I'm just going to go ahead and start the Docker. I'm going to do boot to Docker. Yeah, of course. And as you can see in here, I now have a Docker container or a Docker environment that is set up and ready to go. And also, I am going to let's see in here, and I'm going to do the same thing in here. And I'm going to say boot to Docker. The default user, by the way, is TC user, and that's what I entered to actually get to this stage in here. One of the things that we're going to find out is once we start running with Docker, you will have to find out, and I'm going to run actually one sample program. You need to find out what the IP address for that particular Docker image is. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to do boot to Docker IP, and that should return to me the IP address that that Docker is running under. And you'll know what that means in a second once we start running the sample program. Okay, so before I get into Docker, let me just give an example where I have Liberty application server installed on my desktop, and I have a server there. And as you can see in here, this is the application server that I have on my environment. I have a server, let's say I'm gonna pick this BBH server that if you look at it, nothing in the drop-ins directory, okay? So let me go ahead and start this particular server. And as I start this server, I'm gonna and then I'm gonna do server run and BBH server, okay? And as you can see, this launches the server for me. And as I'm doing that, the server now is up and running, so I can start using it. Of course, this is not interesting because I just want to show you, I haven't shown you anything on Docker just yet, but what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to come in and say, well, for that particular server, let me go to that directory for that BBH server. This session, of course, we're not covering Liberty itself. We assume that you have some knowledge in it. I'm going to go to the drop-ins directory, and just to show you that nothing is running there, I can go into a browser, and I can run my application, and my application is going to come back as I have no idea where the context root is. That's because there is no such application. So let me go back now and actually copy. I have a sample application that I'm just going to copy it into the, or drag and drop it into the drop-ins directory of BBH. And as I'm doing this, I will show you how Liberty will react to, here you go. That's the server that's running. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this one in here, copy it. As you can see, as I copy it, um, and I took the wrong one right here. Okay. Okay, and of course now it's up and running. So let's just go ahead and after this and just go back and um, rerun this one more time, and you will see that it still fails, and that's because I copied it into the wrong directory. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it into the BBH drop-ins directory, and as you can see in here, if I do this, the application gets installed right away. And if I go back to my same browser and hit it again, you will see that I'm able to um, get my application and run it. And so far, so good. There's nothing interesting in here. Just simple application that runs and just randomly generate a number for me for this talk. And it will actually send me a text. What it gets interesting is, let's say that as I'm doing this, now I find out that WebSphere Liberty Profile now has a new application server that is ready to go. I mean, if I go in and try to find out, for example, what version I'm running, and I actually have the command in here, you will see that I am running early access. Okay, so which is very old, something that is not even open to the public. It's pre-GA level. But I want to try and see if my application actually does run. So what I ended up doing is I copied that users directory, as you can see in here, which contains all my servers and everything that is related to my code. And I put it in a place that I know I will be able to map, or Docker in this case will be able to map to it. And this is by default, you'll be able to map to this particular directory, the users directory. Okay, so right now, as you can see, the BBH server is actually running nothing. Nothing is inside of it. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and actually stop the application server that I'm just running in here. Let's go back there, Control C this, and now I stop the application server. And of course, as you can see in here, if I go back and rerun it, it's going to come back and give me an error because there's no application server running. So let's now find out how I can go in very easily from Docker and be able to actually um, um, get the application server, run my application to it without really doing anything special other than just simply running a Docker command. So let's go back to one of the Docker windows we have. And let's say I'm going to take, let's say this one. Okay. And let me just make it bigger. And let's say that I'm going to take, I showed you what level, what version this got me. So I'm just going to go ahead and run a command that's going to give me the product information of what's available. Remember, when you do run the command, and I'm just going to paste it in here. So I'm running this command. We have this minus environment variable that we pass in that says, yes, I do accept the license terms and agreement. I am actually running the WebSphere Liberty. If you do remember on Docker Hub, when we went in there, you will see that now the actual name of our repository or Liberty image is WebSphere Liberty. And that's exactly what I ended up running in here. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but this allows me to do the mapping of the ports from 9081, which is what my actual host is, to 81, which is what's the inside of my Docker VM, or where Docker is running. It's actually going to be running with. Again, the purpose of this session is not to give you a tutorial of Docker. There's a lot of great videos out there that you can use, but just to show you how you can use this with WebSphere and give you an idea on some of the usage scenarios. So if I go ahead and run it, and as you can see, I'm basically going in and I'm just running the product info, and which is exactly what I was doing in here. Now notice that I got in here and it tells me this is 8554, which is for developers. And that's a very, very recent, I think it's the latest copy that's available right now. Because if I don't have it, in this case, I happen to have run this before, so it would pull it down. If I did not do that, it will actually do the pulling. Otherwise, it's already available to me and I could just start using it. Okay, so after I did this, now let me go ahead. Now I know this is what's available to me. Remember, my goal is I want to run my application that I was running with whatever copy that I have today. I want to make sure that it runs with the latest version that's available without having to make a lot of changes. I mean, I'm showing you something really kind of straightforward here, but you can kind of get the idea later on when we talk about when you start doing things with layering, that you create your own container with another level of the application server, and you can switch back and forth between them. So here's the command that I will be running. I just pasted it in here, and I'll walk you through it to kind of cover the key points of it. So again, I accepted the license. This is the environment variable. I'm doing run of this Docker. I map the ports, which is the ports that I would like to run, the secure port or unsecure port. And then there's the -v command, which will allow me to do mapping. Now, what I'm doing in this particular run is I'm saying, by the way, the /ops/ibm/wlp/user directory inside of my Docker container when I run it, I actually want you to use this. And in this particular case, this is my, um, when I told you that this gets mapped automatically for my environment, this gets me to this directory right here, which is the users directory on my Windows machine, and that's the host that I'm running it on. Okay, and what that allows me to do is on my machine that I was running Liberty, now I'll be able to actually point to the same user directory within my Liberty profile and allow me to run it with this to run my BBH server, for example, and run my application. So let me go ahead and actually run the server right now. And as you can see, it is actually launching all this in Liberty in Docker. And as you can see, I have not done anything other than just run the command. The very first time I run it, it will pull the image. Beyond that, it just simply runs with the latest. And I could just, every time I run it, I could just ask for the latest copy and it will give it to me. Now the thing is, the image is up and running. Um, Again, with very little work on my side, I did not have to install anything. And imagine how useful this would be for you when you create different kind of containers, for example, or layers. Now, let me go ahead and copy um, the application that I was telling you about, and I'm going to copy it into the drop-ins directory on the BBH server on my host machine. So this is here on my Windows that I'm mapping the Docker container to. And as you can see, after I copy it, which I just did, it's gonna get installed and now it's available and ready to go. Okay, so of course now I want to run that application. Like I mentioned, we need to get an idea of where this port or how I can get to it. I mentioned earlier you can run the command boot to Docker IP, which will give you the IP address, which is how you can access that particular system. So if I go in to my browser and I basically paste this, and as you can see, I put the IP address that you saw in here. This is the 192.168.59.103, which is up to, which is what points me to the um, um, Docker or to the host or to the VM on my system where Docker is running, and port 81. And this is the port that we did the mapping on, like we mentioned earlier. So the actual port for Liberty is 9081, which is what actually is running inside of um, my Docker engine or my Docker container, I should say. But of course, to get to it, I'm actually using 81, which is the port that I'm going to use from the host where it's running. So let's go ahead and execute that. And as you can see now, I'm able to run my application and I can say IBM, execute this command or this particular file, this program, I should say. And now it did actually execute because I did print out some 666. It's just some random numbers that I put out. And here, as you see, here is an application that is running. It returned back to me to 38.21977. Um, so here you have it. This is kind of a quick and dirty way for you to see what Docker does. And as you can see, I am able right now to just simply test my application, and I know that it will work in the latest release of Liberty, and I've done this with very little effort on my side. The same concept kind of applies that you can build more images, which is you layer it on top, or you can generate more containers. Let me show you what I mean by generating more containers or using more containers. If I go ahead and run a Docker command to do Docker PS to show me the active containers, it tells me that here's the active container, how long it has been created. Of course, there is also the command that you can issue to look at the containers that are not active at that point. Like in this case, for example, I see there's a container that was activated 6 minutes ago, and I could have access to it. Oops, I do not want to paste this, and I can get access to it as I want to by just simply switching back and forth to it. So in my case, I could just go ahead and kill the active container that is running right now. So this particular Docker container that it's running, as you can see, I could go ahead in here and do um, Docker PS, and I could just kill it. Docker kill, and I'm now killing that container. And as you can see, it ended. Um, and after I killed that particular container, let me go back and show you the containers that are in the background. And you can see this is number 2. I can take this Docker container, reactivate it very easily. I can do Docker restart that container, and then I can do Docker attach to that particular container. And of course, that container stopped. I'm sorry, go back to the previous one, the one that I stopped earlier. I can go back and do Docker restart that container. And after that, I could do Docker attach, and that would basically allow me to um, get attached to that container. And I'll show you what that means. And as you can see in here, by doing so, um, I am able to wrong here. Okay, here you go. It wasn't just printing it. Okay, I just killed it again. Let me do restart, and then attach. And as you can see in here now, it actually showed me that restarted that particular application or that particular container that was running. So as you can see, I could run as many containers as I want to. I can name them whatever I want to. And after I'm done with running and activating these containers, I will be able to just simply go back and forth to them. I mean, imagine in a production environment, if you can have one container, you want to try things out, and if you find out that something's wrong from your testing, for example, you could easily just fall back to it. Or from usage scenarios as a developer, I mean, when I write code and I used to copy the entire IDE, for example, with everything that it's there and just add it as a backup. And of course, that was great for me because if anything goes wrong, I could just simply restore the backup and I'm good to go. But imagine if you're able to make all these changes just as layered on top. Just take one more change, add it on top. You don't have to recopy everything. And if there's anything wrong, you could just easily go back and fall back to the previous one, just like I did in here when I said, well, here's a container, just kill it. I want to go back and restart that container because this is exactly what would happen. So there you have it. This is kind of a quick and dirty intro to Docker. I'm hoping that to get more videos on this to kind of show you more of an advanced usage scenarios of Docker, or not necessarily advanced usage scenarios, but just simply more usage scenarios that you can use when it comes to Docker. Again, this is Solomon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.